Hello, and thank you for joining. If you are joining this as a recording, you're joining in virtually, or if you're joining live, thank you so much for joining me today for a presentation about mammals, because this time of year in autumn, we are starting to see more evidence of mammals as the foliage is starting to fall. We can see into forests now. So in this presentation, we're going to explore what makes something a mammal, and we're going to learn to identify them. So overview of what we're going to talk about first is going to be what makes something a mammal as compared to an amphibian or a reptile. We'll also talk about field markings, ways to identify mammals just by sight. So if you actually see a mammal crossing the road in front of you or going through your backyard, how to identify it, as well as how to identify an animal by the evidence that they leave behind, because that's probably how we're going to be interacting with them the most. Then we'll talk about a handful of local mammal species, some fun facts about them, some identifying features, some little bits of cool info. And then we will wrap it up by talking about why should we be conserving and protecting these mammals to begin with. So starting off here, what makes something a mammal? Okay, so first off, it's an animal, right? So when we look at taxonomy, we can understand how animals are grouped or how living organisms are grouped by understanding the different hierarchies of their taxonomic status. So all animals fall into the kingdom, the really broad point of taxonomy, into Animalia. From there, we can get more specific. We can kind of narrow down, and specific matches the word species, right? So we can get more specific until we can get to the specific individual, which is called species. All mammals fall into the phylum of Chordata, meaning that they have cords, they have vertebra going down their backs, they have a spinal column. Some animals do not have a vertebra. Think of animals like a starfish or a funny little fly, a fruit fly, right? So they're animals, but they lack that spinal cord. Then we can narrow things down even further and say, cool, now we get to class, and that's a mammal. Other classes can include animals like amphibians, reptiles, birds, which would be aves, fish or ichthyes, right? So we've got many animals that fall into the phylum of Chordata, mammals being one of them. From there, we can get more and more specific. There are a total, well, so far, there's roughly 5,400 mammal species that have been identified around the world. Of that, many thousands, 462 are native to North America, meaning that they are found here, they are indigenous to North America. There may be others that have been brought here, exotic animals. We can think of things like hedgehogs. Hedgehogs are originally from Europe or Africa, however, have come over via the pet trade, and maybe some have been accidentally released into the wild and established their own little populations, but they are not native here. 70 of those native species can be found in Pennsylvania, which is where I am giving this little presentation from. So this diagram off to the right here shows the different families, orders, genus, species of mammals. So you can see kind of the little silhouettes are the basic shapes of what are these animals. We can see Rodentia. You see the little silhouette of the branch of Rodentia goes towards a little mouse. primates, you can see the different types of primates, of your New World primates, Old World primates. You can see the marsupials, the monotremes. We'll get into a little bit of what a monotreme might mean, but moral of the story, there's a ton out there, and they can all be clumped into their own little groupings as well. So we've got the class Mammalia. So what overall means that an animal, this animal, is going to be in the class of mammal as compared to in the class of ichthy or fish. First is the fact that they have fur, hair as a body covering. This is typically, when I talk to little kids or even adults, this is typically the first characteristic that people tend to think of is fur. There are 3 types of fur or hair, this sort of body covering, and that includes fur, the traditional fur that we think of, and that has a set growth length. For example, we think of our pets as our dogs and our cats. The fur does not keep growing until it's longer than our hair, right? And that's the key difference there. They have a set growth length. We have our short-haired dogs and our long-haired dogs and our medium-haired dogs. And they also, the hair follicles contain something of an oil, which we may experience in our own hair, called a sebum. Hair is ever growing, meaning that if I don't cut my hair, it's going to get to the floor at some point. That's a little crazy if we would think that a dog might have that, right? But the hair also contains sebum. So the primary differences between fur and hair is the amount of time that they grow. Then there is wool. This is also continuously growing. However, instead of containing an oil of sebum, it contains lanolin. If you ever go to a farmer's market or to a farm's open house that has sheep or alpacas, one of the things that you may get to experience is getting to rub or pet the sheep or an alpaca, and then rubbing your hands together afterwards, and your hands feel so soft. This is because of that oil, lanolin, and it is a commonly used oil in lotions and really nice body care for humans as well. In terms of the fibers of different types of hairs and furs and wools, things like that, we've got 3 primary types. The first is vibracea, and that is a sensory organ. So each little follicle, layman's term, whisker. Think of vibracea as whisker. So we've got that, these little sensory organs connect to the hairs of those whiskers and give the animal information. It can be helpful when swimming to maintain head positioning in the water. It can be helpful for finding food, for understanding body dimensions, for understanding where you are in conjunction to other objects. Think of a lot of these underground or burrowing mammals might have really large whiskers to help them kind of feel around, especially if eyesight is really poor. You might have a lot of feelers on your chin, like in moles or voles that have more feelers, vibracea on their chin to help them feel around on the ground. Can help to spread chemicals that are really important in terms of spreading pheromones for mating. So these sensory organs are important, and we see them in mammals. We can have guard hairs, which this is a microscopic, this middle picture is a microscopic image of squirrel hair, of squirrel fur. These guard hairs are the protective layer. It protects from wounds, from scratches, from insect bites, from all sorts of things, from touching or getting in contact with the skin. Protects, like think of our own hair, can protect our scalps from sunlight and UV radiation. Guard hairs are really important. Underneath the guard hairs, though, are underhairs. These underhairs are what makes the animal look floofy, and it poofs them out. This is usually much softer than the guard hairs. So you can see here this picture of this juvenile white-tailed deer is a very floofy come winter. This photo I took in November of last year, and you can see kind of how poofed up this deer looks. And that's because of all of those underhairs that are acting as insulation to help keep the deer nice and warm. In a human, though, we've got a kind of weird mixture of protective and insulative hairs. So we've got kind of a strange blend going on. Now, as we continue with the importance of fur, we can talk about the fact that mammals, which include humans, so we are also mammals, are endotherms. And this is kind of, we'll use the phrase warm-blooded. Our blood is not actually hot as compared to like a snake or a reptile. That might be ectothermic, meaning that they're getting their heat from outside sources. We consider them cold-blooded. Yeah, those are kind of misnomers. So scientists like to use the phrase endothermic. Endo means inside. Therm, think thermometer, means temperature. Mammals are able to thermoregulate through our own being as we eat food and we ingest calories. That whole process of metabolism creates heat, which helps with insulation. So we're able to create our own heat, whereas ectotherms, our reptiles, our amphibians, things like that, they cannot. They rely on basking on a sunny rock to help give them heat. And if they don't have that, i.e. it's winter, they're not going to be able to produce enough heat to warm their bodies, to move well. So they'll go into brumation, a period of brumation, which is kind of like hibernation, not quite. Mammals also go through live births. This is called being viviparous. Vive meaning life, like think vida, yay. Mammalian development lasts a really long time comparatively to other species. And this all happens in utero. Now, the process of birth itself may change depending on what, now we've got the class of mammals, so now the family, the order, the genus, the species, all of that might change a little bit the exact process. So we've got things called monotremes. These are our egg layers. Really bizarre that we have egg layers in the mammalian class, but we do. And it makes sense because these animals are just so utterly bizarre. We have the platypus and the echidna. The platypus is very strange. It has a bill like a duck. Weird. It has venom. Also really weird. So we've got some very interesting characteristics of the platypus. However, they still are mammals because they do have that fur, hair, body covering. So monotremes are egg layers. Marsupials are born severely underdeveloped. If we as humans were to have a baby in that fashion, they would be stillborns, or they would be considered to be like extreme preemies, and there would need to be all sorts of crazy medical intervention. However, in a marsupial, they have something called their pouch. Think of your kangaroos, where they have their joey that goes into the pouch to finish development. So our native marsupial here in North America is the opossum. So they're born very, very small. Think of like grains of rice, itty bitty little creatures that then travel to the mother's pouch, and they stay in the pouch for the rest of development until they are large enough to kind of act and behave on their own. And then you have placental mammals, and this is all the other mammals, and it's more commonly what we think of, ourselves included, dogs, cats, all of our, mammalian pets, things like that. the wildlife that we see outside. Pretty much everything that we're going to be talking about today falls under that category of placental mammals. And here's the last, most well-known sort of characteristic, and it's that mammals produce milk, and that's where the word mammal comes from. Mamma means breast. We think of mammary glands, right? So we can see how the words correlate to one another. The babies of mammals drink this milk, and it is so super nutritious, and it aids in rapid growth, and it helps to further development. It helps to ensure the baby's survival so that they can escape predation very quickly. So they need to grow rapidly to escape from predators or just to be able to survive out in the wild. So now we've got those characteristics. There are some more. Obviously, you have to have a vertebra to be a mammal as well. But those are the kind of primary four that most people think of. So if we've got that down and we can look at a wild animal and say, cool, you have fur, we know you're a mammal, awesome. How else can we identify them just by sight? Some can be tricky to ID on sight without having a good understanding of field markings just due to their similarity to others. For example, is that a red squirrel, a fox squirrel, or a gray squirrel? Here in Pennsylvania, we can have all three. So being able to understand the little differences between each of those individual species can be helpful. So for the rest of this presentation, as we're talking about field markings or evidence, there's absolutely no way that you're going to memorize all of this just from a presentation. Field guides are going to be your best friend. So Peterson, Sibley, Audubon, they're all really great field guide brands that I definitely encourage you to find a nice local regional mammal field guide for you. And you can start to narrow down what you're seeing to be able to find the exact mammal in your field guide. Overall, some of the things you want to look for are fur appearance. So what does fur mean? Why is fur different colors? You see my hair is blue. I made it that way. Humans are kind of crazy. We can do whatever we want to our hair. But wild animals are not going around dyeing their hair blue. But they have very purposeful coloration to begin with. For example, I have here our non-native zebra. This zebra photo is taken in Masai Mara, Kenya. And animals that are black and white usually are saying, hey, I am a warning. I am toxic in some capacity. I am not something you want to mess with. And we can think of here in North America of our striped or spotted skunk. We don't want to mess with a skunk. Skunks smell real bad. Maybe you've experienced having a dog that has tried to mess with a skunk and it has not gone well, right? So think of that black and white, high contrast, really visible to predators and prey alike. However, it can be a little creative, maybe not as odorous as a skunk. However, the zebra has these high contrast black and white stripes. There is a fly that can spread disease, the tsetse, and we don't like that fly. It spreads disease. But for the zebra, the tsetse fly cannot really survive well on the zebra. So this high contrast black and white coloration can be a signal to that fly, hey, don't bite me. It won't go well for you. Thus keeping the zebra safe and preventing that disease spread. Another sort of reason why fur is the color that it is could be for camouflage, if it's blending in with its environment. And one of the interesting things with mammals is that their fur color can change seasonally to aid in camouflage. For example, a lot of rabbits or squirrels will kind of change their color to be more of a grayish brown or even a white in some hairs. to match the winter landscape, to match snow or just the general kind of dull coloration. And then in the spring and the summer, they'll start to lose some of that insulative under hair fur and gain some of that color back in their protective hairs again. And then while the type of grooming doesn't necessarily indicate what sort of species or animal you are looking at, it still can be an important indicator to other animals. If you are poorly groomed, it usually means either A, you are incapable of getting the nutrients and the resources that you need, or B, you're sick. Either way, it signals to other mammals that, hey, we don't want to hang out or spend time with that animal. It's either going to be sick and it could spread that sickness to us, or B, it's not strong enough to be a potential mate. Next thing we can look at is, where are the eyes on the head? And we're going to talk about this a little bit later as well, but overall, prey animals, often are herbivores, are going to have eyes on the side of their heads, whereas predators will have eyes in the front of their heads. So this can help indicate, if you're not quite sure of what sort of animal is this or where does it fall into, you can now distinguish between a predator and a prey just by looking at its face. Then we have sexual dimorphism. This can also be kind of tricky because sometimes the males and the females will look different from one another, just like the seasonal kind of camouflage of, well, the animal kind of changes colors, so how do we identify it? Depending on its gender, it may have different appearances as well. For example, in this photo, you can see the deer. This is the same deer family that I had shown with the insulative fur. So we can start to see these deer, now that it's spring, are losing their tufts of the underhairs. However, we can all see that they don't have antlers. These are white-tailed deer. The males have antlers, so these must be the females, or either so juvenile, the one that's closest to the number 3 there is a juvenile deer. It may be a male that just hasn't grown its first set of horns in yet, or antlers. However, the other members of its herd are all adult females. They lack that weaponry. And this is truly weaponry, those antlers that they have, as they are in their rutting season or they're trying to be territorial, establish dominance, fight for mates. They need some sort of weapons. So these horns or antlers can really, really help. We may also see in predators that males will have much more protuberant canine teeth that acts as weapons as well, or tusks. They may have display features. So think of the mandrill, which is a primate. That's one of the most well-known animals for being so sexually dimorphic, because around their rumps, they are extremely colorful, whereas the females are not as colorful. They, depending on the animal species, it may have more fur, especially around the face. Think of your lion that has that big, big mane if it's a male. So they may have different facial features. We think of our orangutans that have kind of those discs on the side of their face, or an elephant seal that has a protuberant nose if it's a male. So there may be some sort of sexual dimorphism in their appearance. And of course, if it's a female, especially during mating season or breeding season, they may have pronounced mammary glands that are actually visible. We think of cows or a lot of cattle species, very obvious udders. However, all of those characteristics can be great if we get to see the mammal in person, but that might not always be the case, because many mammal species are crepuscular, meaning that they are out at dawn and dusk, or they are strictly nocturnal. We are, as humans, are diurnal species, so we may not really get to see them very much. However, oftentimes we get to see the evidence that these mammals leave behind. So we know that there is a population of fox in the area or raccoon in the area based on certain bits of evidence. First things that we should look for are tracks. This is going to be really, really helpful. This time of year, we're starting to get a lot more of the late season rains. So in any muddy areas where plants are starting to die back now, we have exposed mud or soil or sediment. The rains come and an animal walks through, leaving their tracks behind. Come winter, we'll be able to really see things very well in snow. Then we have poop, and I always love talking about mammalian poop. I think it's a good time. But if you're a little squeamish about that, you can feel free to skip on over the poop stuff. But all mammals do this to some capacity. Some think more of your cats, just like our house cats want to be in a secluded little litter box, and they bury their little cat turds in the litter. They want to be discreet about it. Big cats are very similar. Some want to be very obvious about it because it could be a territorial marking of, hey, I'm pooping up on this object. Foxes are really well known for that sort of behavior, saying, hey, look at this. This is a signal to all other mammals. This is my spot. So sometimes we can really see the poop that's left behind. And then there are artifacts. Artifacts you can consider to be tufts of fur that maybe get snagged in a thicket or thorny sort of area. There may be skulls that are left behind after a predation or an animal just naturally dies and a bird like a vulture, carrion eater, comes and cleans it up. Things like that. Bones, all sorts of good stuff. So we'll start with the tracks and the paw prints. When we are out looking for tracks or a find tracks, here's an example of mud after the rain, and we can see a lot of canine tracks pressed into the mud. So we know that some sort of canine walked through here. And we can even distinguish it down further. This was a domestic dog as compared to a fox or a coyote that went through. And the way that we can figure that out, act as little detectives, is by utilizing several features and understanding what goes to what. First off, we have size, actual measurement. So we have our domestic dog, and they can range from Chihuahua to Great Dane. So size can throw us off because if we don't see the dog that went by, we don't necessarily know what size it was. We can look at the number of toes, which, in a human, we've got 5, but not everything does. In our dogs, our canines, we have those 4 toe pads within the one large kind of central one beneath those 4 toe pads. We can look for visible claws in a canine or a dog, any type of dog. The claws will be visible. They cannot retract their claws like a cat or feline can. And then we can look at the stride or the straddle. The stride is going to be putting one paw in front of the other, the kind of distance between that. And the straddle is how kind of wide across it is. So if something is really, really close together, we can kind of get the impression that, it's not maybe as large bodied, or it's not putting its feet out as far, or it's walking one foot in front of the other, right? So canines have less space all around. We can see here in this diagram on the right some examples of the stride and the straddle here of the front feet versus the hind feet, and that kind of repeated pattern that their tracks make. Then we look at the poop, and this falls into we've got 2 kind of subsets here of scat and droppings. Scat is the poop of a predator. Droppings are the little turds of an herbivore. And as weird as it is, looking at scat, kind of going through the remnants can really help a scientist, or if you're just a nature nerd and you want to go crazy, you can learn a lot about an animal based on what it ate. So if you're thinking about, all right, well, here's the poop, so what is in it? We see in this first picture of outside, we see that there's a lot of seeds in it. So first off, we know it's not a pure carnivore or a strict predator. We know that it's some sort of omnivorous creature, right? So we can look then at the image. Now, this is of an owl pellet dissection that I ran with some kids at a summer camp. So owls are not mammals, they are birds. However, the process is kind of similar of going through the droppings, the scat, the poop, whatever, with tweezers, looking to see what the animal ate. We can see a lot of bones here in this image. And so that can tell us, okay, this was a predator, this was a carnivore, or at least an omnivore of some capacity. We've got wonderful scat here because not only can we look at what was eaten, was it plant matter, was it high protein content, was it a mix of fur and seeds left behind, but we can also look at the shape of the scat that's left behind. For example, a lot of canines actually have twisted ends of their poop. So that's something that we can really distinguish between when we're looking at, think of like we're trying to wonder, is this bear poop because it's really large, or like bobcat? Well, is it twisted at the end? Because that might mean that it's more of your coyote or wolf if you're like, oh, it's a big, big predator creature. Then we can look at the bones or artifacts that are left behind. My favorite thing to look for personally is for skulls, especially if there are any teeth that are left behind. This can tell me a lot. Looking at leg bones can also be helpful. And any sort of head ornamentation, antlers, horns, things like that. Now, the reason why skulls can be so important is because we can identify between the prey versus the predator. And that's depending, like I said before, on where the eyes are in the skull. The reason why this is important is because it tells us a little bit more of the animal's life history. If it is a predator, the eyes will be in the front. And that is going to be really, really helpful for a predator who has hunting capabilities, because that helps us, humans are technically predators, that helps us see movement really easily. As you can see by this diagram, there's a lot of stuff in front of us that we are able to see. Less stuff behind and like to the side and behind us, but a lot in front of us that we can see. If you have ever been to a sports bar, restaurant that has TVs and you cannot help but look at the TV, I'm so bad at this. I cannot sit facing a TV. We often find ourselves tuning out of conversation to look up at the TV. And this is because we are predators. We are attracted to that movement that we see, and our eyes want to dart there and follow that movement. If you're ever out on a hike and you're walking through the woods and all of a sudden a toad jumps out of the way of your feet, and you're like, I didn't even see the toad there until it moved. That's because of the positioning of our eyes and the incredible camouflage ability of this smaller species. Now, prey, though, they're not necessarily hunting as much. They might be more of your herbivore. In this diagram, we have a rabbit versus a feline. The rabbit is not hunting for anything aside from clover, which the clover is not moving. So it's okay if it doesn't see movement very well. However, their position of having eyes on the side of their skull is so helpful in getting a fuller view of their surroundings, meaning that it is less likely that a predator will be able to sneak up on them because they can see behind them to some extent. So that's a cool thing about the eye orbitals, but now we've got the teeth or the dentition that can be very helpful for us as well. In mammals, we've got very general dentition. We have incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. Humans have those teeth as well. We've got all sorts of different animals here: carnivores, meaning meat eaters, herbivores, meaning plant eaters, and omnivores, meaning mix of meat and plants. They all have the teeth to some capacity. However, they may look a little different based on that animal's specialty of diet. All the teeth do something a little bit different. Incisors are going to be in the front. They are our really flat teeth that are designed to cut. So if you're an herbivore and you're going up to chomp a leaf, you can kind of cut or prune that branch. Or if you're a carnivore or an omnivore, you can cut into flesh or muscle. Canines are going to be the longer of the teeth, the kind of pointier teeth. They are designed for ripping and really getting a strong hold on the object. In a carnivore, this is really, really important for catching onto prey or for kind of piercing into flesh. In herbivores, though, they are nowhere near as important. So you can see that they've been diminished. They're much, much smaller. They don't need them as much. Then in our omnivores, they're going to be a little bit bigger than our incisors, but not by much. We've got premolars. Those are designed for grinding things together and shredding. In canines, felines, all of our carnivora, we've got our carnivores. We've got premolars that are called carnasal pairs. You can see the yellow in that top diagram. And the way they fit together is much more like a pair of scissors. So it's going to be really great for shearing down meat, making it into smaller, digestible sizes. In herbivores and in omnivores, they are more like plates that kind of grind together and smoosh things down. The same with molars. So the molars are the things in the very, very back. And you can see that in the herbivore, they're much more pronounced in this because they're grinding down all of this plant matter. All right, so we've got some ways to identify things by the evidence they leave behind, by sight. So let's take a look at some of our local species. Pennsylvania has 70 mammal species that have been documented here by the Game Commission. However, as I was going through the list of those 70 mammals, 15 are considered to be commonly found. And when we're looking at what does commonly found mean, this means by humans, number one. And so they're animals that are well adapted to living alongside people. They're well adapted to suburban areas or what we can call ecotones. Ecotones are areas of transition between one habitat and another. So usually a forest transitioning into a field. Those can be really found in suburban settings that have maybe woodlots in the back, and then it butts up against the little town that you have. They can also exist in urban areas where you have green spaces that meet, your sprawling city sort of area. So animals that can be very well adapted to an ecotone environment or an urban suburban environment are going to be some of the more readily seen animals. So we're going to talk about those, some of which though might be, they're common, but we might not see them very well because they might be nocturnal. First, we've got the raccoon. These are opportunistic. So when we go through our mammals here, we're going to talk about their diets, common field markings, and then where do they live. So if you were going to go try to look for some, where might you find them? Being an opportunistic omnivore means that you can eat kind of whatever you want, which makes living alongside humans really, really easy. They're going to eat anything they can get their paws on, which can include your trash cans, right? Or not the trash cans, hopefully, but the stuff inside your trash cans. A lot of them, I hear stories of people who leave out cat food. Please don't leave out food for animals. Stuff like this happens where then the raccoons are like, ooh, yay, cat food. I love cat food. And they'll eat your cat food. This can lead to habituation of wildlife to humans, meaning that they will not be scared of humans when they really should be. And not that you're going to hurt them or anything like that, but that means that they are going to be more likely to spread diseases. We have zoonotic diseases. As we get down in habitat here of raccoons, they're rabies vector species. So living alongside them can be a little when we're that close together. They can also then be nuisance or pests, which then lead to a lot of humans wanting to kill them, especially in inhumane ways. Instead of just doing a relocation, they might do a poisoning instead. It can also lead to a spike in roadkill incidents. So just for the safety of the wild animal, for the safety of yourself, your family, your pets, please don't feed wildlife or put out food outdoors. However, when they're not eating cat food and trash, they are out in the wild. They're looking for things that are really close to stream sides. They like forests that have this waterway through them because they like frogs, crayfish, other little types of fish, eggs. So they steal bird eggs, reptile eggs. They'll eat insects, they'll eat fruits, they'll eat nuts. They love it all. Raccoons, you can kind of always identify them. This is a really, really easy animal to identify. Not too many things look similar here locally. They've got that standard kind of bandit face mask of a dark gray, black, dark brown color. And on their tail, they have rings. They have a big fluffy tail, big tail, long tail, with dark rings. You will always find that. And like I said, they like forests, especially where there are waterways that go through or trees that have cavities in them because they like to nest inside. Then we've got our red fox. Again, this is going to be omnivorous. However, unlike the raccoon, they're not necessarily opportunistic because they're mainly predators. So they are going to be more actively hunting smaller wildlife species. However, during the growing season, so kind of end of summer into autumn, they are going to be eating fruits and berries as well to supplement. So depending on what season it is, you may notice that the scat composition changes. You may see a lot more seeds and fruit pulp, kind of digested fruit matter in scat during this time of year, maybe a little bit earlier. And then during the winter into spring into early summer, you might see entirely comprised of tufts of fur, digested protein, digested muscle fibers, because there's no more berries available for them. So they're just being predators. Common field markings, this can be a little challenging as well, just because we do have other types, other species of foxes here in Pennsylvania. We have the gray fox, but also because the red fox has something called morphs, or different colors that it can be. So we've got a lot of different types. We can have a completely black fox that is actually a red fox, or we can have a silver fox or a cinnamon. So we've got all sorts of different colors. However, always they will have a white tipped tail. They'll have that little tiny white tip there. Typically, though, they will have this kind of, in this picture, you can see this red fox kit has that standard reddish, rusty colored body with a paler tummy. That's not always going to be the case, and they may have differences in their socks or their stockings. Is it white? Is it black? Is it red? That can change based on genetics, which kind of like humans, of what color is our hair based on genetics. However, they will always have that white tip tail. Even if it's a black fox, you'll still see that white tip. These guys love woodland edges, and that's because the woods are very safe places for them to have their dens in. However, there's a lot of really good rodents to eat out in fields, so they want to be able to travel very easily to their field setting to be able to hunt. They like that transitional area. These are also really common in suburban areas where you have maybe a woodlot butting up against somebody's house. Now, the next two are going to be, these are very common here in Pennsylvania. However, they're not as easy to see just due to the time of day that they are around. First, we have the southern flying squirrel, and you will notice that this photo was not taken outside in the animal's natural habitat, primarily because I wouldn't have been able to capture it. These are nocturnal animals. And also because they get inside people's attics. This is a flying squirrel that got inside my pantry. And we were trying to scoot it back on outside. But they like to be inside because a lot of their habitat is actually being taken away. So they need somewhere to go. And attics are a nice, safe, warm spot for them. They are primarily herbivores. They really like seeds, acorns, berries, things like that. However, if they can catch an insect, that's cool. Or if there's a really tiny bird egg that they can find, they might go for that. However, really they're gonna try to stick to the seeds and the acorns and the nuts. Common field markings for the southern flying squirrel is this, you can really see that high contrast of the dark up top, the pale tummy. And this is very helpful for animals that are suspended. So think fish as well. Fish are kind of suspended in water. Flying squirrels are suspended in air as they glide around. And this is called counter shading. So when an animal is looking at them from above, they see just kind of the darkness. When an animal is looking at them from below, they're looking up and they see kind of the color of the sky. They're not seeing too much difference. So this is a kind of common coloration pattern for mammals that are suspended, or animals that are suspended in their kind of horizon, their area. But we have this grayish brown body, grayish brown flaps, skin flaps that come out. Those are what helps them glide through the air. These are fuzzy membranes that connect from the front leg to the back leg. They have super large eyes in comparison to the size of their head and other animals of this size. And that is what helps them to see in the dark. They have a long tail that has fan-like fur that comes out. So it's almost like feathery fur, where you have the bone of the tail and then the fur kind of sticks straight out, and that helps act almost like a rudder as they are gliding. These primarily like woodlands, especially if there are cedar trees or other mature trees that have nesting cavities or spaces in between the bark. They like to use that bark as nesting material. And they are extremely nocturnal, meaning that they're not really going to be coming out during the day. This little lady here was out during the day, but obviously not under normal circumstances. My dog found her and was barking at her in the pantry. She was trying to sleep. And we were able to get her out of the apartment. But it's that sort of thing of, this is probably the only time that I personally will ever see a wild flying squirrel was in this very bizarre circumstance. The white-footed mouse, Paramiscus leucopus, these, you're probably going to see them a lot. So I think it's the next one that we've got is another nocturnal one. These are listed as the most common mammal here in Pennsylvania. Very, very prevalent throughout the entire state. They are granivores and insectivores, meaning that they are eating grains and insects. So think of your seeds and your nuts, as well as then during the summer, any little tiny buggies that they can catch. They have, again, like the flying squirrel, they have really, really protuberant, big eyes in comparison to the size of their head. They have big ears. They always have this like rusty, tawny colored top and white tummy. They also have pinkish white feet, where I don't think you can see in this picture anybody's little tootsies, but the color of their nose that you can see, that's kind of the color of their feet as well. They also have hairs on their tail. Some other types of mice that we might find in Pennsylvania might have a hairless tail, so that can be a helpful identifying feature. They love woodland edges. Again, those ecotones, really great shelter and then going and having an ability to find food. They like thickets or shrubs. That gives them nice protection. And here you can see they are inside a bluebird nest box. So bluebirds are eastern bluebirds that will come, they'll build a nest inside a nest box for the spring into summer. And then once their fledglings have gone out into the world, they leave. They no longer use the nest box. The females completely leave. Juvenile males kind of form these little bachelor groups that just kind of hang out. And you might see them in forest or river areas, riparian zones. And then they'll come back again in the spring to usually the same nest box that they had used the previous year. So during the winter, the nest box is vacant, but there's still a nest in there. So mice, these little white-footed mice, will go up into the nest boxes and kind of make it their own little home, make it nice and cozy. They like to utilize pre-built nests. Nest boxes are also really safe because it's designed so that things can't really get in and grab them. So predators can't get it. But then in, think like February, early March, depending on where you are in your climate, if you see bluebirds starting to come back scouting out, you have to go in the nest boxes and scoop that nest out because the bluebird wants to make a new nest and they don't have space because the mice have taken over. And by that point, the mice don't necessarily need it because now the mice, they're done breeding, they're done taking care of their little babies. So they're going to go scatter into the woods and the fields doing their own thing. So you clean that nest out, and then you can see these cuties up close and personal. However, you also want to keep in mind that these little cuties are the carriers of Lyme disease. So the deer tick will feed upon the white-footed mouse and contract Lyme, and then can spread it to us. So where you have high populations of white-footed mice, you probably also have high concentrations of deer ticks. So just keep that in your mind. And here we go. Here's the other more nocturnal or crepuscular animal. We've got the big brown bat. This is a really common bat in this area. Here we have, unfortunately, this is a photo of a bat that I needed to take to a rehabilitation center. Again, me getting photos of nocturnal animals usually means that there's kind of these extenuating circumstances of why are they out during the day. For this bat, it was found injured, and I was able to take it to a bat specialty rehab center here in south central Pennsylvania. These bats feed on insects. For the big brown bat, they are primarily eating beetles. However, other night flying insects they'll go for as well, especially if they have hard, crunchy exoskeletons. Big brown bats have nice, strong jaws, So being able to kind of crunch down on something that the little brown bat or other native bat species wouldn't be able to helps reduce competition for food sources and gives them good nutrients that they need. They have completely brown fur that contrasts really well with the darker brown skin or membranes of their wings. They have large ears and large, for their body size, large tragus. And a tragus is kind of that flap of cartilage that is found in our ear. Humans have them as well. They're not ginormous, but for the bat, that can help to funnel sound, which is really, really helpful as they're flying around at night trying to catch their prey. They do lack something called a nose leaf. So some bat species you may see images of that have like a leaf-shaped object that is part of their nose. It's like someone took their nose and like smooshed it really far up. That also can help to funnel scents and sounds. Big brown bats lack that. They have a typical little stub nose. Bats like the little brown bat, big brown bat, they require cavity spaces. So dead trees, caves, a lot of man-made structures, they'll try to get up under siding, things like that. And it all goes to the importance of keeping dead trees around. The bat is not the first animal that we have talked about today that relies on cavities, that relies on these dead trees or snags. They don't really make their own nest spaces. So as humans go into habitat and take out those really vital spaces, those dead trees or wildlife snags, we're getting rid of habitat for them. That's not really great because now they don't have a place to go. Either they need to leave the area, which now increases competition in the areas that they go to, or they have to make a home in a new kind of setting. Our homes, which people don't really like when we find bats or flying squirrels, things like that, raccoons inside our homes. So by conserving habitat, we can help keep them outside of our own homes, as well as preserve their populations, because we don't want a heck of a ton of beetles just everywhere. The big brown bats help manage populations. So we'll now get into why should we protect mammals? There's a whole bunch of reasons why, but some people don't immediately think of the ecosystem services that mammals provide for us because they're not obvious pollinators. They are not obvious decomposers, things like that. So we may not originally think of why should we protect them, aside from the fact that they're cute. So an ecosystem service is something that benefits the ecosystem. It is a service that the animal provides, and it can also provide a service to people. So a lot of land managers, conservationists will try to create this almost like monetary assignment of this is how much money this animal is actually saving a human because of all the services that it provides. And that can help conservationists kind of give priority rankings to what should we conserve, or it helps connect people, policy enforcement, policy makers. It can help connect individuals to the animal in a unique way. So the primary ecosystem services include provisionary, regulatory, cultural, and supporting. This photo here, why I have it, is obviously these are mammals that are in more of a domestic looking setting. This was taken at a wolf preserve in Lidditz, PA. And these are wolves that should be wild, but they are being protected and conserved because we are severely lacking predators here in Pennsylvania. So first, provisionary resources. These are animals that provide humans with some sort of tangible resource. And the first, whether you are vegetarian or not, you cannot deny that for some people, meat is really important. There are 9 game species here in Pennsylvania with 14 more fur-bearing species. And You might be a vegetarian, so you don't necessarily benefit from this particular resource. However, maybe you know somebody who is an omnivore. Most humans are going to be omnivores, not all of us. We've got the vegetarians, vegans, pescivores, things like that. However, hunting in Pennsylvania is a really, really common way of food acquisition through game species. We have seed dispersers who are going to be going around eating the fruits and the vegetables and then pooping seeds out, which then germinate. And as a forager, I can say thank you to so many of these seed dispersers who are providing me with food in unique areas. For example, we have so many species of native cherries here in Pennsylvania. We have native plums, apples, blackberries, raspberries, all sorts of delicious things that I can go and forage and provide food for my family. For example, I recently last week made a mulberry black cherry jam, preserves, whole bunch of jars, and that's going to last me until next growing season when I can harvest more. So I can say thank you to the seed dispersers that have made those resources available to me. Small mammals can also be pollinators, and while we don't have any locally, that doesn't mean that they don't exist. We have the honey possum, this little cutie pie here. This is not a photo that I took, but this honey possum is a primary pollinator in more tropical areas. We have regulatory services through animals that are landscape engineers, and this is going to be a service that helps the ecosystem function as it should. So we've got animals that are kind of land managers. So black bears are a huge, huge, huge landscape engineer here in Pennsylvania. They kind of help to create the forests and like the pioneer forests and forest succession, all of that happen in the way that it should. We've got decomposers. So while the bird here, this turkey vulture, is not a mammal, it needs something to eat. You can see it is feeding on a mammal. Decomposition is a huge, 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 huge part of nutrient cycling back into our ecosystem. And then again, we have mitigating climate change as a ecosystem function. Oak trees and oak forests can help sequester this climate change and help sequester pollution as well. And our native eastern gray squirrel is one of the primary oak tree seed dispersers. So we've got lots of services here that these animals can provide. We have cultural or aesthetic services as well. And primarily this is because humans can relate to mammals because we are one. So we can look at the characteristics of a mammal and feel a larger connection to mammals than we can to amphibians or bugs or birds per se. That doesn't mean that we don't like those other animals. It just means that there is a relation to them that we might not have with others. So especially the visible eyes, we love eyeballs. We love seeing animals with eyeballs. And when an animal doesn't have an eye like ours, we might get a little freaked out. For example, I'm going to throw my husband under the bus here. He is weirded out by sharks because of the kind of blackness of the entire eye. He's weirded out by that. Mammals he doesn't have a problem with. So just a little kind of like strange psychological thing there. We are mammals. We relate to them well. They play a really important role in inspiring art, inspiring music, performances, cultural ceremonial practices, or less religious-based ceremonial practices, and more like here we have agriculture. That's a huge cultural practice, especially here in Pennsylvania. We have a lot of agriculture that revolves around mammals. It revolves around our cattle and livestock, goats, sheep, horses, pigs, cows. They're all mammals. here I have one of my personal favorite book series is the Redwall series by Brian Jacques. And it features these cute little mammals that are, it's a very fantasy setting, as you can see, with the little mouse holding a sword and a shield. Humans really like to anthropomorphize mammals. But we have a lot of book series inspired by mammalian relationships, things like that. Then we have supporting functions and supporting services. And these are going to be services like photosynthesis. And while we're not having mammals necessarily that do photosynthesis, and I say necessarily because sloths do allow habitat for photosynthetic algae to grow on their fur. However, the sloth itself is not doing photosynthesis. So that isn't included here. However, things like soil health and soil support, nutrient cycling, and to a very, very small extent, the water cycle can be perpetuated by mammals. First, we've got this mole here. Came up to the surface and I was inspecting its incredible paws. Moles, voles, other underground burrowers are huge proponents for soil aeration. They help to cycle and move nutrients throughout the various soil horizons, as well as their tunnels can actually provide oxygen to get into the area, which can then help plant growth. So not the worst thing in the world. Then we have nutrient cycling, and here we see a little squirrel eating seeds. As an animal eats plant matter, it metabolizes it, poops out. That now is a little fertilizer packet that can help future plants to germinate, which then feed other animals, including humans. So very valuable resources there. And I said to a lesser extent, the water cycle, and that's because we transpire, we drink, we pee, we respirate. That all impacts the water cycle just to a very tiny extent. So overall, protecting mammals can be really important to protecting ourselves, protecting the ecosystems that we value, that we appreciate, that we are a part of. And of course, they're cute, they're wonderful, but we should be valuing all life here. So thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions, you can let me know, YouTube chat, YouTube comments, you can email me, find me on social media as well. And I hope that this fall into winter, you are able to go out and find all sorts of incredible wildlife in your area. Thank you so much.